There's a sense of gloom on the streets of Kyiv right now, and it's not just the army's difficulties at the front, a major domestic corruption scandal, and strictly rationed electricity because of Russian strikes on the power grid. It's also the feeling among people that once again, Ukraine's allies and enemies are trying to dictate their country's future.
Trump's special plan is, in general, a capitulation for Ukraine. I don't think the Ukrainian people will agree.
I don't believe there will be a lasting peace after these negotiations, because there is a side that cannot be trusted.
There have been so many of these agreements, but no results. I don't believe in it.
Ukraine's leadership is more positive. President Volodymyr Zelensky's right-hand man, Andrei Yermak, travelled to Geneva on Sunday to thrash out changes to Washington's 28-point peace plan with the US Secretary of State and the Europeans. Details aren't known yet, but Washington and Kyiv said in a joint statement they had drafted a refined peace framework.
We managed to keep extremely sensitive points on the table, including the full release of all Ukrainian prisoners of war under the all for all formula, and civilians, and the complete return of Ukrainian children abducted by Russia. These are important steps, but to achieve real peace, more is needed.
This is a high-stakes moment in the trajectory of the war. Highlighting this, Europe's leaders held an informal meeting about Ukraine on the sidelines of an EU-African Union summit in Angola. Borders cannot be changed by force, they insist, and making Ukraine do this would be rewarding Russian aggression.
Ukraine's territory and sovereignty must be respected. Only Ukraine, as a sovereign country, can make decisions regarding its armed forces. The choice of their destiny is in their own hands.
Russian attacks on Ukrainian cities are unrelenting. This was Kyiv on Monday.
We don't believe in peace negotiations, because while they sit at negotiating table with a pen, we are hit by missiles and bombs. People die.
US President Donald Trump says Ukraine has until Thursday to decide on the deal. There's an undeniable sense of déjà vu here. Back in August, after the Putin-Trump summit in Alaska, Ukraine's government, together with European allies, mobilized to try to put the brakes on a deal they felt was essentially a Kremlin wish list. Zelensky's tactic then, as now, was to work with the deal, try to change it more to Ukraine's liking, and so that if it falls apart, it's because of Vladimir Putin, not him. And Donald Trump sees Russia as being the enemy of peace. Rory, Challands, Al Jazeera, Kyiv.
Audrey Macalpine is a journalist based in Kyiv. She says Ukrainians want more of a say in the negotiations to end the war.
It was surprising last night to hear reports coming from Marco Rubio that there was so much substantial progress. He said since talks began, really, that this was the most progress that there had been. This delegation is led by the president's chief of staff, Andrei Yermak, and also Umerov, the former secretary of defense. There are two quite controversial characters here at the moment, so Ukrainians don't have a whole lot of trust, particularly in them. But Zelensky seemingly briefed those two on Ukraine's interests and how to move forward in these discussions. But really, Ukrainians, they're split. Some people are very much engaged in these conversations happening in Switzerland, and others are less so. They're used to a lot of dialogue happening about their country, a lot of false promises. A lot of people don't have their hopes up yet when it comes to this peace plan. Marco Rubio has been backpedaling slightly. There was a phone call that he had with U.S. senators while they were at a security conference in Halifax, Canada. In this phone call, allegedly, Marco Rubio said that this peace plan had largely been introduced by Russia, and that the U.S. was more acting as an intermediary and passing this plan through to Ukraine. However, Ukrainians now, this is their chance to have a voice in this discussions. But Marco Rubio, since those allegations came out, he backpedaled very much and said, no, that in fact, Russia and the U.S. had deliberated on this. So we are getting a lot of mixed messages as to who initiated this plan, where it's coming from. But certainly it's true now that Ukraine is at least having their say in regard to it.
Yulia Shapovalova has been following developments from Moscow.
In Russia, many have been skeptical that Moscow would accept this revised plan, which reflected Ukrainian and European interests. Vladimir Putin's aide, Yuri Ushakov, stated that the Trump peace plan would undergo modifications by all sides, like Russia, Ukraine, Europe, as well as the USA. But he said that many positions of the current European and Ukrainian plan, which Moscow saw earlier, now seems unacceptable for the country. And Moscow called it unproductive and said that it's not suitable for Russia. And also Russia received a signal from the US to meet in person and start negotiations and discussions on the plan for Ukraine. But at the moment, no concrete agreements have been made. Earlier on today, Vladimir Putin, in his telephone conversation with Turkish President Erdogan, noted that the version of the US peace plan, earlier reviewed by Moscow, could serve as the basis for the final peaceful settlement. But the Russian side actually says that its interests should be respected, and it is interested in political and diplomatic resolution of the Ukrainian crisis. But once again, if all Russian conditions and interests are not taken into account, then, according to Vladimir Putin, Russia is ready to continue its fight on the battlefield, as it is quite successful there, because it wants to achieve its goals no matter what. Yulia Shapovalova, Al Jazeera, Moscow.
Joining us from Riga is Eldar Mamedov. He's a non-resident fellow at the Quincy Institute and former Latvian diplomat. Good to have you with us. So, given your background and experience, if I could start by asking you, if Ukraine is forced to give up territory, or if Ukraine doesn't get the sort of solid US security guarantees it's seeking, how is that going to be seen by some of the key frontline states in the Baltic and Nordic regions?
Well, thanks for having me. Unequivocally, if Ukraine is forced to cede parts of its territories to Russia as a result of its invasion, it's going to be seen as a catastrophic precedent in the Baltic states in particular, because it will show that the violent seizure of land and aggression of a neighboring country can actually work out and can be rewarded. And given their history, given their traumatic experience under the Soviet rule for 5 decades, the Baltic states obviously see themselves as potentially being next in line. So to what extent those concerns are justified or exaggerated, that's a different question, which could be discussed. But unequivocally, the precedent would be seen as a very dangerous one.
Well, it's quite clear already, if you look at the history of statements from Donald Trump and his administration officials, that their thinking is in the direction that some territory needs to be given up by Ukraine. If that's the direction things are going, and what kind of policy response do you think we can expect from Baltic and Nordic states?
Well, Baltic and Nordic states will continue doing what they have been doing up till now, which is to push for maximum support for Ukraine, which means harder sanctions on Russia, which means working through NATO and through European Union to further expedite any support, military, economic, and diplomatic.
But Eldar, do you think that policy will continue even after, if they reach some kind of deal that means Ukraine has to give up territory? Will Baltic and Nordic states feel?
I think in that case, whatever their feelings and emotions, the Baltic states and the Nordics, they will accept the reality, because the reality is that particularly the Baltic states, they're completely dependent on ally support. They have no bandwidth, no leeway to play an independent role in this, which is completely untethered from the United States and from NATO. And however much they may find any eventual deal distasteful, they eventually have no other choice but to accept it.
But does that mean they may not be able to reject the deal, but what sort of policy implications might it have on them strengthening their security and defense cooperation amongst each other, amongst other European nations, if they feel that the US position is not where they would like it to be?
Well, they will insist that the Baltic edge of NATO is really seriously fortified and militarized for the future to play a deterrence role against whatever potentially aggressive devices Russian Federation may entertain in the future.
Will that heighten tensions within NATO, especially between the US and Europe?
Yes, I think it has a potential of heightening tensions because there is a considerable war fatigue in the United States and especially in the western part of the continent. There are political forces in Europe which are becoming more strong and more popular that in fact question the unconditional support for Ukraine and that want this war to end. And for Baltic states, it would be very short-sighted to ignore those trends and to insist on their Maximus rhetoric and Maximus positions, which, again, as I say, they are emotionally understandable, but diplomatically and strategically, they're not always very far-sighted and strategic.
Okay, thank you very much. Eldar Mamedov, a non-resident fellow at the Quincy Institute.
Thank you.
Don't miss out. Get the full picture. Subscribe to Al Jazeera for reliable news and expert insights. Like, share, stay ahead.